People wanted a breakdown. Well, the fight is breaking down from a few perspectives, isn't it? Tyson's world championship resume consists of Deontay Wilder and Vladimir Klitschko. Yeah, he fought Wilder 3 times, but that's the only 2 opponents he's faced. See, the thing is, Tyson Fury would be favourite to beat Povetkin. He'd be favoured to beat the likes of Joseph Parker. He'd be favoured to beat any of the ranked opponents Dillian or AJ has faced, but the truth is, he hasn't fought them. You can do your whole, well, he would have beaten them anyway routine. Let's put him in the same category as Muhammad Ali. They're ranked opponents, so whether you don't think they're all that because Tyson hasn't fought them and AJ or Dillian fought them, these are the guys you've got to beat to develop a resume to become the best of at least your generation. When he won the belt from Vladimir Klitschko, a dominant champion, yes, but there was no rematch. There was a rematch clause that was never obliged. He was exposed for taking PEDs shortly after he beat Vlad. He actually took the PEDs after he beat Christian Hammer, his penultimate fight before fighting Vlad. Didn't give Vlad a rematch. PED violation. Ducked David Price. Pulled out at the last minute from the Alexander Ustinov fight. And is it any coincidence these are 2 heavyweights who were the same size as he was, and he just didn't want the smoke? He pulled out of a Pulev fight for the European title. I think the guy is a little overrated. Now, I know it's not very popular to say that. Yeah, he can fight, but he moves scary for a boxer. Some would argue there's no legit case to pick Dillian over Fury. Some would argue that. Now, Fury was the favourite in the 3rd fight against Wilder, but in the first 2, he went in as the underdog. He was the underdog against Vlad. Now, he's in the favourite position against Dillian Whyte. Is that why he's so subdued in the build-up? Because his dad didn't want him to take this fight. He said, if he's not up for this, he'll lose to Dillian. That's what he said. His dad said it. He better be up for it. I'll tell you that much. Now, there's a few things I can't make out until I actually see the fight. Has he been respectful to Dillian because he just doesn't see Dillian as a threat, so no need to get animated? Is he looking at their relationship? They sparred together, lived in the same premises while they were in the same camp. So he knows Dillian, he's seen Dillian at his best, at his worst, vice versa. So trying to scream at him could possibly be counterproductive, because smack talk, yes, it can give certain fighters the edge at times, but it can also drain your battery if not done at the right time against the right opponent. It could be a case that he realizes Dillian has come prepared for all that. That's why he didn't turn up to the press conference, perhaps, or he didn't turn up to the media workout. You could argue it's because Frank hasn't really gave him any concessions with the tickets, with the purse, etc., etc. That's why he didn't turn up. But Dillian looks prepared for any of the smack talk and extracurricular activity that Tyson has reveled in. People always talk about Tyson getting into fighters' heads like Vlad or Deontay Wilder, and all of a sudden now he's saying it's not important for him to get inside Dillian's head. So is this a different approach? Or, look, I believe there's always psychological warfare going on. Even if it's very subtle, I believe there is. And I believe this could be a ploy by Tyson Fury, by not getting Dillian all riled up, by himself not getting all animated. This could assist them in a strategy to try and outbox Dillian. Dillian's a great guy. Anyone can get knocked out. This is a great fight. I've got nothing but respect and all this and that. So if Dillian don't get animated, the crowd at the press conference don't get animated, or at the weigh-in, you don't have the press all up in it with the headlines. Oh, look at them at the press conference. This is going to go off in the ring. You don't get that. You manage to lower the expectancy of what Dillian calls maximum violence, which may be one of Dillian's only ways of getting to Tyson if Tyson just gives up his height and reach and goes toe-to-toe with him. I think they want to box Dillian for as long as they can. If they have to go toe-to-toe, of course they're going to have to do that. But I think they want to box him, and they don't want to rile up Tyson Fury because he's a bit of a volatile character, and perhaps if he starts getting in verbal exchanges with Dillian, he might feel almost compelled to go and slug it out when I think they have a strategy to box Dillian, because why would Tyson come in 13 pounds lighter than he did in the last Deontay Wilder fight? Well, there could be a few reasons for that as well. They said they were struggling to get the weight off in the last fight, but then it's conflicting because Tyson will say, I weighed 277 deliberately to bully him. He said something similar in the build-up to this fight here. I'm going to come in really big to take Dillian out, and then he weighs in 263. I don't think Tyson will be able to stay on his toes for 12. I don't think he will be able to. Not at this age. Not at 263. It might be lighter than he was in the last Wilder fight, but I don't see it. He says that Dillian is no Deontay Wilder. Well, why don't you just weigh in really heavy and just brawl him like you brawled Wilder? Well, you saw Dillian mocking Wilder bench pressing, and then he lifted a similar weight himself and made it look pretty easy. He's the naturally heavier guy, 253 for this fight, and he's always weighed 250, sometimes up to 268 and stuff like that he's weighed. Wilder, who is now in his mid-30s, weighed 238 as career highest last time out, and that's still 15 pounds lighter than Dillian. In the first fight with Fury, he weighed in 212. That's not even a bridgerweight. He's not a big heavyweight, so despite having that right hand, which is a good punch, but it's a little overhyped by his fan base and what a lot of people think it is, he couldn't really impose himself physically on Fury, especially in the last two fights when Fury got on the front foot. He couldn't impose himself. And this is something we're going to see play out if Dillian can make that, 17 to 18 stone bulk be a factor. Even though Tyson is heavier, you've got to remember there's a few factors at play with the weight. Dillian is a big, full-size heavyweight, and his center of gravity is lower than Tyson Fury, even though he's lighter than Tyson Fury. So what you might find is Dillian is more developed in the neck and shoulders than Tyson Fury, even though he's shorter, kind of like Mike Tyson back in the day. Even though his opponents were heavier and taller, Tyson had the huge biceps and shoulders, neck, thighs, and it was often him on the front foot. And with Fury taking that 13 pounds off, he might just allow Dillian to lead and try and keep him at bay with that 5-inch reach. Whereas with Wilder, he worked out after the first fight that he might be better off brawling with his thin-legged opponent, who, although is tall, is more wiry than bulky. And that's part of the reason he was unable to knock Fury out, even though he floored him 4 times in the 3 fights. Because if he was able to impose himself more on Fury, when they're wrestling in the exchanges and test Fury's lactic acid, hurt him with some body shots, more than likely, that right hand that he floored Fury in the 12th round with would have probably kept him down. But because Fury was able to box and move, and Wilder didn't get to the body and he didn't really impose himself physically like that, Fury got up. Miraculously, that has to be admitted, but I think that's part of the reason he was able to do so. Wilder's career was as good as dead after the first fight because Fury didn't go after him. He was feinting, he was keeping a respectful distance, and even with Fury doing all that, Wilder didn't really go after him like that, or was unable to go after him and make it more physical. And that's what he needed to do, because he was the active guy. Fury was sitting on the couch, eating junk food and drinking beer. For how long? But Wilder never tested him like that. He never made it a grueling battle like that. He landed a couple of right hands that put Fury on the floor, and that's what kept him in contention on the scorecards. He didn't take advantage of what was a vulnerable Fury because of the inactivity he didn't. So when Fury had to strategize for the second fight, they're thinking, well, that's Wilder at his best. He's been active. He's been knocking people out. This is what he's been doing. This is what he brings to the table. So if I bulk up and work on my inside fighting, there's a good chance that Deontay Wilder will not be as effective as we've seen him. And anyone following the channel, they know that I was championing Fury trying to go forward against Deontay Wilder. You had experts, world champions, press, media saying, no, don't do it. You're going to get knocked out. I was saying, nah. If this is what his team have diagnosed as a winning strategy, they have to do it. They have to do it. Win, lose or draw. And it panned out for him. In the next 2 fights, it panned out for him. It turned out he could beat Wilder 2 ways. Now, for Dillian to have a chance, there can only be one way for Fury to beat him, and that's on the back foot. Maybe not on the back foot, but keep in range. Keep in range. Not being ultra aggressive, piling up points on the jab, not being close to mid-range, but not necessarily retreating. Holding the ring center, banging in that jab, try to pivot, move off, back to the jab, not letting Dillian set, not letting him get inside. I'm rooting for Dillian to win, but if Tyson is able to push him back from early, there's not much hope for him, in all truth. Let's just keep it real, even though I'm rooting for him, I got to talk the truth. Both men in the last 2.5 years have only had 2 fights. Pandemic is partly the reason for that. Dillian has fought Povetkin twice, Fury has fought Wilder twice. Both of their last 2 fights took place in 2020, 2021. Thing is though, is if we go further back than that, Fury's had 3 years out and he yo-yo diets way more than Dillian. He's had to take off 10 stone to make that comeback. He's took off, what was it, 12 or 13 pounds for this fight. So I don't believe he can just indefinitely do this for the rest of his career, however long that is. He says he's going to retire after this fight. It's going to catch up, and this could be the night it catches up with him. It could be. Another thing in Dillian's favour is Wilder did get to him a little. He did get to him with some big shots and had him on the floor twice. And, you know, Wilder's not an inside fighter, but he managed to get through to Tyson. He caught him with the body shot first and then came over the top with the right hand. People are going to say, well, Dillian doesn't have that type of power. I don't know. Dillian's left hook is a lethal weapon, man. I think people are sleeping on that. But yeah, a career heaviest Wilder, he did better going toe-to-toe with Fury in the 3rd fight than he did the 2nd. If Tyson isn't able to keep it long range for more than 4 or 5 rounds, Dillian's lower center of gravity and his more robust physical structure than Wilder has could be an issue. Could actually be an issue for Fury. I'm not convinced that Fury is a great offensive fighter. I see him overthrowing the right hand, telegraphing it in the last 2 fights with Deontay. Wilder certainly don't have a catch and shoot game, and Dillian does. Now, if he can get that going, that would be a plus for him. I would like to see Dillian feint to the body, then come over the top with the right hand if he's going to loop it. Look, everything is suggesting a Tyson Fury win. He's had the championship fights. He's beat the baddest man who's ever put on a pair of boxing gloves in Deontay Wilder, according to some. So everything is heading towards a Tyson Fury victory. And Tyson Fury is the favourite. Let's not get it twisted. Dillian has it all to do. But we got to look at certain factors. So while I was pointing out earlier that Fury avoided David Price to fight the likes of Martin Rogan, a small heavyweight. He avoided Ustinov, another big heavyweight. Pulev, you know, even back then was 6'5". It's not a small heavyweight. He avoided these fights. He avoided the Anthony Joshua fights. While Dillian has taken on Anthony Joshua and rocked him pretty good. But he couldn't deal with AJ's size, power, and speed. Despite what people want to say, AJ is a handful. He's a handful. So he's fought Anthony Joshua. He's fought Robert Helenius, who is going through somewhat of a renaissance up there at the PBC after knocking off Karanaki twice. This is another big heavyweight he's fought. He's fought Marius Wack. He's fought big-size heavyweights. Probably more big-size heavyweights than Fury has faced. He's used to fighting big men. He's used to physicality. He's done MMA and kickboxing. There's no guarantee he would have beat Wilder, but why did he want that fight so bad? Why did he want it so bad, but yet was reluctant to take the AJ rematch? Because he thought he could bully Wilder like Fury bullied him. Like, listen, Fury came out there feinting and throwing jabs and herky-jerky style first time around when he fought Wilder. Dillian wasn't going to do that. Dillian was going to go to Tyson's plan B, what he did in the 2nd fight, straight away. He wasn't going to hang about with Wilder. He was going to get stuck into him, high guard, and try and rough him up. Now, whether he would have been able to do it It's two different things. He wanted to bully Wilder and humiliate Wilder. That's what he wanted to do. And he was very single-minded in his objectives. That's what he wanted to do. Good thing Wilder ducked the fight, because I don't think he fancied it. So don't be surprised if Dillian looks more comfortable in the ring than what a lot of the experts are predicting. Do not be surprised. And remember where you heard it first if that's the case. I've got to cover the whole spectrum. There ain't many big men who've been able to box like Tyson Fury. So you could argue, yeah, they're big men beats that he's been in the ring with, but they're not Tyson Fury. You could be right. You could be right. Anyone can get slept in this. I accept Dillian's punch resistance is under scrutiny. Yeah? Got knocked out by AJ, floored by Rivas, knocked out by Povetkin. He can get knocked out, but this is heavyweight boxing. Anyone can get it. Anyone can get it. This is heavyweight boxing. And while people scrutinize the knockout loss to Povetkin, let me break it down. Like most channels will not be able to break it down. I'm not bragging, but I'm going to have to tell people that more often in videos that a lot of people are not going to have certain foresights that I have. I can't let myself become obsolete and not point that out. So you look at the knockout. I look at the chain of events. I look at more than Dillian Whyte in the equation. I look at Povetkin, old ass Povetkin, getting knocked out by Anthony Joshua, and it was a bad knockout. It looked over for him. But he came back and beat Hughie Fury and got a draw with Michael Hunter. I think Hunter scraped it, to be honest. But nevertheless, he got a draw with Hunter. He came back with 2 fights. And that kept him in contention to get the fight with Dillian and get the knockout over Dillian. So that's resilience and that's single-mindedness on Alexander Povetkin's behalf, that he wanted to stay in contention that bad that he came back and fought contenders. 3 contenders on the bounce. Hughie's a fringe contender right now. Michael Hunter was then, and probably still is now, was a ranked contender. He hasn't lost. He hasn't lost since he lost to Usyk at Cruiser. And then Dillian. He fought 3 contenders. That shows resilience. That's what kept Povetkin in contention to get the fight with Dillian, to knock Dillian out. And Dillian, likewise, after the knockout, he wanted to fight Povetkin the next month, but pandemic and probably more legal bureaucracy kept that fight out of the loop until 2021. And he knocked out Povetkin, what was it, in 3, just walked through him. You see, being able to bounce back in boxing is what will keep most fighters in contention. A lot of fanboys are looking for this Mayweather blueprint, but Mayweather was a special fighter. That's what a lot of people are not appreciating. They think that Mayweather is just some also-ran big mouth and, yeah, I expect my fighter could just do that. No, they can't. Now, Dillian stayed in contention by coming straight back at the same fight with the same ferocity, or even more ferocity than what he approached the first fight with Povetkin, and getting a knockout. That's what I'm looking at. That's what I'm looking at. I'm looking at this guy who came off road, no real amateur experience, was fighting at the Camden Centre, and minutes before he was doing the ring, was having to sell tickets. I'm looking at that guy getting on KOTV, low-key shows, bringing himself to British contender level, then to a British champion, taking on the likes of Anthony Joshua, becoming a pay-per-view star, getting knocked out by Joshua, and then becoming a ranked contender, mandatory for that belt in front of 94,000 people. I'm looking at a guy who can come back from setbacks. And to me, maybe not to some of you people who ain't impressed with that, to me, that stands him in good stead for the fight. I don't mean he can't get knocked out, because we've seen him get knocked out. But that stands him in good stead, that he's not discouraged. If you're going to beat Tyson Fury, you have to be the type who's not discouraged. So he's prepared to take chances. He's prepared to accept that he can get slept. He's not quitting. You see, Wilder took the last beating from Fury. We haven't heard anything in terms of, I might possibly come back. Haven't heard anything. And that's what I look at, is the fighting spirit, the resilience, the bounce back from the knockout. That's what I look at. Old school perspective, of course. The New Jacks, everything's just microwave for them, isn't it? It's just like, you know what I mean? It is what it is. Fury himself, he was on the floor twice against Wilder. There's a lot of unknowns about Tyson Fury as well. The two championship opponents leave a lot of unknowns. And this fight will do a lot to tell us more about Tyson Fury as a champion and as a fighter. I'm glad he's taking the fight. I'm glad he is. I'm not going to give him too much props for doing that, because that's what you're supposed to do as a champion. But I'm glad he's taking it. And I've got more respect for him that he is doing so. Will it be his last fight? It depends. If Dillian levels it out, I don't see it being his last fight. I really don't. If he chooses to retire without fighting AJ, Usyk, what can I say? I won't be that impressed, to be honest. I won't be that impressed. I like to see more bodies on the resume before I start talking about the Joe Lewises and the Alis and other great fighters. But, well, I'm rooting for Dillian. I think it's going to be a grueling fight. I'm tempted to say 50-50, but probably 60-40 in Fury's favour. 60-40, that's what the split should have been, isn't it? I'll leave a video in the description box. 20 greatest heavyweight upsets. Heavyweight title fights, to be specific. I've done that the other month. And you know something? I had that video to do for a couple of years. And I had a lot of the parts of what I was going to use. And I just kept ignoring it and kept putting it off. Then a few weeks back I said, okay, let me put this video together. And the next heavyweight title fight is this one, after I put it out. Maybe the stars are aligning for a Dillian victory. It says here Fury is a red-hot 2-9 favourite to win the fight with Betfred. 4-6 chance of a knockout for Fury. 7-2 for Dillian to cause an upset. They say many will be tempted by Betfred's 21-5, just over 4-1 that he lands one of those big shots on Fury. And we know Fury's been on the canvas. Fury hasn't fought in the UK since 2018. The only time I've seen both men look upset during the build-up was the little fracas which John started, and they wasn't mad with each other, was they? I see Tyson upset with a journalist saying he's never going to give Sky an interview after they grilled him about Daniel Kinahan. And I see Dillian upset with Mauricio Sulaiman when he confronted him face-to-face about the way he's been treated, waiting for this world title shot, saying it's cost him millions, sending him crazy. That's the only time I've seen both of them riled up. They seem to be riled up more than that. Stuff outside their fight, more than the prospect of facing each other in the ring. Hopefully being courteous and friendly doesn't extend itself into the fight. The last thing we need is another Manny Pacquiao, Shane Mosley, where they were touching gloves every second. I'm rooting for the body snatcher. I'm rooting for him. They've held him back, sanctioning bodies, WBC in particular. Wilder tried to fuck with his career. That wasn't nice. Him, Shelley Finkel, and the fan base wasn't nice. Fury, he stalled it a little, but, he's going to attempt to clean up Wilder's work in terms of Dillian as a contender. Frank Warren, he's tried to treat Dillian like a second-class citizen for the build-up, and Dillian hasn't been happy. So Dillian will be looking to take his frustrations out on Fury. He will be. But hopefully he doesn't let all of that stray him off what the game plan is between him and Xavier Miller. And let's not forget Harold the Shadow Knight. And for those who don't know, Harold the Shadow Knight is the original team Lennox Lewis, Manny Stewart, Kronk style, whatever you want to call it. He was there in that camp when Sugar Hill wasn't even being spoke of. And I heard the influence that Harold the Shadow Knight had in the corner in the Povetkin rematch. I heard it. That can only be a plus. But with Sugar Hill, he's not nothing to sleep on. Andy Lee, obviously, he worked with Emmanuel. So a lot of Kronk references expected tonight. May the best Kronk style win. Although Ronnie Shields on a Lady Chan video recently said, what Sugar Hill is doing with Tyson Fury is not the Kronk style. That's what he said. And Ronnie would know more than me. I doubt Sugar Hill or Tyson will complain about that if they get an emphatic victory tonight. So let's go. Let's get it. Enough talking.